Well, I really, really do love Christmas time. I have to say, those of you who know me and have known me a long time have heard me say this many times. But I am such a summer person that Christmas is the one thing that kind of redeems winter for me, right? I start missing summer at the end of September. Just to kind of let you know. So those you know me know that that's absolutely true. But I really do. I always loved Christmas time. I love Christmas time. And sometimes as a pastor, I sometimes wonder why I like it. Because it's so usually frantic. It's a season that's, always far busier than I'd like it to be. And it's usually quite complicated. And this year, it's actually much less complicated, and some of that is in kind of a sad way kind of complicated, just because we're not doing a children's program like we usually do, though we have something extremely special for the kids, and I'll highlight that a little bit later, something really, really cool. But this year it's relatively simple. It's but for many of us, and as I said earlier in this service, sometimes we take our already busy schedules and then we add things. And even if we've got a good pace going, just that extra shopping, social things. I mean, I'm talking about fun things that we enjoy, but you add those extra things and wow, it can really be difficult. And sometimes we wonder, are we really enjoying this, For some of you, it's just kind of logistics. It's perhaps your family spread all throughout the country. And Cindy and I always feel so blessed that, we have to go all the way to Concord for my parents. You know what I mean? So I wish. Her parents live up the street. Because we're on the top of a hill, we almost don't have to start the car. We just could coast to their house. But we live so close. My middle daughter, Brittany, she lives next door to my in-laws. I mean, it's just everybody's close. We love it. Janelle and Jeff, they were all the way in Livermore. We're spoiled. We just love it. But sometimes, even if you have all local family, that can be kind of crazy too, because then everybody's got expectations that you've got to be there at certain places, and so driving back and forth, you feel like you're, I'm always grateful for that. For others of you, this is a difficult, complicated time because of resources, just a lack of extra, money and time, and, maybe you already have some debt, some credit card debt, and the pressure of gift giving can be really, really difficult, and it adds to that stress of Christmas time. Then and I'm just going to say you gals, but I know some of you men cook as well, but with all the cooking and the decorating and the visiting and the gift giving and all that, Christmas time, it can really seem more like a high pressure deadline than a holiday. And that's, and some of you, and I'll say it generically, some of you are dealing with family frictions, and then you're going to get everybody all together in the same room, and you say, hey, decking the halls is great. I'd like to deck a couple of my family members. But, that's a different thing that you have to leave that and not do that. I don't recommend that. So, and just managing sometimes both sides of the family where perhaps even separation or divorce has entered. That can be really, really, really tough, emotionally tough. Maybe not even logistically, but just emotionally. And there are family members also that, maybe even that during this last year, that's when it's especially hard. But family members who've passed away. That first holiday, that first Thanksgiving, that first Christmas, that is tough. My grandfather died, who I was very close to. He passed away when I was in high school, and it was right around Christmas time. And I think of it every single year. They call that anniversary illness, in counseling. But you think of that, and some of you are experiencing that those members of the family you just wish were there. And so it's a sweet time to remember them, but also a painful, sad time because you've got that difficulty with loss. And then, some people. And this makes me super sad, and this is what, Hillside, part of Hillside is about, is we find people, some of you, and I want to just throw this out this way, some of you will find yourself perhaps alone, or of people who will be alone. And I want you to know, if you know of anyone who is going to be alone at Christmas, their family's gone, they're just by themselves, please let me know. We want to facilitate so that doesn't happen. That shouldn't be the case, but that could be really, really difficult. I had somebody sharing with me the other day. They were talking about being alone. They're going through a divorce, and they were saying they were alone. They go, "Oh," and they said it like this. They said, "Well, it was kind of nice." And I said, "You didn't say it was nice. You said it was kind of nice." And they said, "Well," I said, "Be honest with me." They go, "Yeah, it's lonely. It's quiet. It's." And it was really, that's what people are experiencing. And if the kids are gone or whatever, but it can be a difficult time. And no matter what the reason. The emphasis on family, on friends, on shared good times during this festive season and all that kind of stuff that everybody, that can be really depressing. That can be really, really discouraging. And I just want to say again, as your pastor, as your friend, you are loved, and we want so much to be able to you to know that. And but we all know it's a time of year that surfaces tensions and unmet expectations and the pain of absent loved ones. So what do we do? And I'm going to use, kind of the commercial phrase of this. But what happens when the magic of Christmas and the wonder of Christmas seems to just feel out of reach? How do we reconnect, with the reason for the season, the real reason for the season? How do we connect with that? There are over 100 designations and titles in the scriptures for Jesus. From Old Testament to New Testament, there's over 100 different ones. But today we're going to begin a series with one focused designation, and that is Jesus as the light of the world. And it seems like lights and Christmas seem to go hand in hand. When I saw all the decorations, I was really kind of thinking about this. I was working on a few different things, and then when I walked in that first Sunday and Levon had put all these wonderful lights up, I said, okay, well, that's it. I've got visual aids and everything all around me. So the light of the world. But lights and Christmas seem to go hand in hand. Of course, Edison's given credit for inventing the light bulb, but he also invented the first string of lights in 1879. And in fact, we've got a really fancy picture of them right there. Edward H. Johnson put the very first string of electric Christmas tree lights together in 1882. Now, Johnson was a close friend and a partner of Thomas Edison in the Edison Illumination Company. And so Johnson had hand-wired 80 red, white, and blue lights, and he wound them around the Christmas tree. And as far as history, we know that was the first time. Now, we know in 1890, the strings of lights were mass-produced then and so forth, and it became a part of that. Going back, they used to put candles in lights, and how crazy that was. That goes back to the 17th century. Can you imagine putting candles in a green tree that's been, that's drying, almost as you watch it? But besides candles on trees, European Christians, they used to display a burning candle in the windows of their house, and that was a visible evidence to people who would go by, from the outside. It would indicate that other Christians lived in that house, and that they were welcome to come and worship Christ there. And so today, sometimes we do it, I think, mostly just for the way it looks pretty. But that was where that really started. And did you know today it's estimated that more than 150 million sets of lights, not lights, sets of lights are sold in America each year. And they say 80 million homes decorate with holiday lights. Light and Christmas just seem to go hand in hand. And, you think about just the functionality of lights. I don't know if any of you lost power, a few weweeks ago. But Cindy and I, we did at our house. We had for a couple of days, I think 48 hours, we didn't have electricity. And light, you can bundle up for the warmth, but the light. And so we're going around with little LED lights trying to light our way. But light in general is comforting, right? Nobody worries about walking down a brightly lit alley. But make that same alley dark all of a sudden, and it's a whole different thing. Think of the lights that save your life in the middle of the night, like the little night light in the bathroom that keeps you from breaking your neck, right, when you go there. Not big, kind of keeps you from harm. It also adds warmth, just the beauty of it. And even though I know these are little electric ones with battery. But there's just something, isn't it just kind of comforting and warm about that? Well, we put candles on birthday cakes, celebrating light. And while Christmas lights can be enjoyable and beautiful and all that, let me just say as we start this, they certainly aren't bright enough to brighten some of the darkest circumstances, situations, and that some of you are feeling and some of you are experiencing. What makes Christmas both wonderful and terrible, but hopefully more wonderful than terrible, is that Christmas seems to exaggerate everything that's going on in our lives. All of the bad. If you feel lonely on a daily basis, Christmas, it makes you feel even lonelier. At the same time, it also points to things that are absolutely amazing. And even the fact of, we worship every Sunday, but there's something joyful about this time of year. So it's important not to lose sight of the real truth surrounding Christmas. And so we're going to be talking about this the next few weeks, about the light of the world. And I want to invite you, if you'd like to, if it's helpful to you and not distracting, I would love for you to, follow along if you would like. And maybe some of these are thoughts you could share with people or friends or family during this Christmas season. But the thing that I want to point out first of all is something I've actually already said during our service, and that is this. That Christmas, the song says it's a wonderful time of the year. Christmas isn't a wonderful time of the year because of what is happening. You are in a situation in your life where maybe life is great. I was talking to somebody this morning. How's things going? Things are going great. I feel blessed. It's wonderful. You may be in that kind of a situation where you feel like life is going well. Some of you, perhaps, because of your job, because of your family, because of situations at school, whatever the case may be, there may be a health diagnosis, and it could be something that really has put in kind of a darkness and a sadness in your life. And I want you to know that this isn't the most wonderful time of the year because of what's happening around us. That's not why it's so wonderful. Why? We're confronted with a number of different things. Think about it. You've got problems perhaps right now in your life, problems that you just don't feel like you can solve. There's problems that we have every day. Some of you at work, that's what your job description is almost, hey, I'm a problem solver, and you've got problems. But what about those problems that we can't solve? There's also people we can't control. You've got people in your life who, doesn't matter how much you pray for them, try to help them or whatever, they stay the same. They are making their choices, and that's a real difficulty. And the hardship also may be that you're really close to them, maybe even related to them, and people you can't control. And also, and this happens from kids all the way up through adults, but there's expectations we can't meet. And if we look in the mirror long enough, you know what I find? I find that I am the problem I can't solve many times. I am the person I can't seem to control. And I'm the one setting expectations that other people can't meet. And we have these problems we can't solve, people we can't control, expectations we can't meet. But I want you to know, Christmas isn't wonderful because of what's happening around us. But the second thing I want to point, or really the point of it is this. Christmas is a wonderful time of the year because of what happened. At Easter, we celebrate a one-time event. And it's really great. We got one shot on that Sunday, and it's a big, Easter celebration. At Christmas, we celebrate a season where we are looking forward to an event that changed everything. We find ourselves even looking back in the Old Testament, looking at the prophecies that were fulfilled. But God sent his Son to the world, and he became the very center of history. But more importantly, God sent Jesus to become the center of my life. Become the center of your life. That's really the most important. And when we allow Jesus to become the center of our life, we get a stability. We get a hope and something that gives us a real sense of purpose. And that's why it's so important for us to share this. He gives us a sense of assurance even when there is so much fear. And we see this in the different accounts of the Christmas story and the Christmas events surrounding it. Don't fear, don't fear. There was a lot of fear, and yet Jesus came to remove that fear. I can put it this way, and I'm going to really hone in on this, the third point here, is that Christmas isn't wonderful because of who is with us, physically with us, but because of who is for us. God is with us. But those around you, it's going to be great. I hope it's a wonderful time with your family and all of that. And it may be wonderful. But the most wonderful part of this season isn't who is going to be around us physically, but who is for us, God for us. Christmas is a reminder that Jesus is the life, Jesus is the light of the world that overtakes, conquers the darkness. And the darker and the more complicated things get, and at Christmas everything gets a little more exaggerated, but at Christmas we're able to focus on the light of the world who has come to make a real lasting difference in our lives. Now, many of you, if you study the Bible, in the New Testament there are 4 Gospels. There's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and we have 4 individual accounts of the life of Jesus. Each Gospel emphasizes a different aspect of Christ's life. Some think, well, why do we have 4? Why couldn't somebody one of the guys just write this whole thing down? Well, there was really an emphasis. If you read each of these, you'll find a different emphasis. For example, in Matthew was really trying to get across the point. He was saying, this is the Messiah, the King, worship him. That was very important kind of theme of Matthew. Mark, when he came, he gives really different details around the same events, but he said, this is the servant who humbled himself and came for humanity, so follow him. Luke we're probably the most familiar with his account of Jesus' birth, but he said, this is the only man among men without sin, imitate him. And these 3 Gospels are full, they're all fairly similar. If you read all of them, they overlap and they're fairly similar, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And they are referred to, and this is just extra credit, all right? So this will not be on the test. But those 3 are called the Synoptic Gospels because they basically include the same stories, often similar sequence and similar, sometimes identical wording. John's Gospel is different. John says, his basic theme is, this is God in human flesh. Believe in him. And unlike Matthew and Luke, John doesn't give us a birth announcement. Going through that, he doesn't. Instead, what he does is he gives us a different perspective. And what makes John's gospel so unique, especially this time of year, is that when John wrote his gospel, John was a very old man. Most scholars believe his gospel was written the last, and it's pretty easily deduced that way, but he was the last of the gospels to be written. And we don't know this for sure, but it seems like John kind of sat down and wrote this account, not knowing how much time he had left. And you'll understand that in just a moment, because he wanted to make sure that this got recorded for future generations. Now, we know that God inspired the whole Bible. God inspired John to write his gospel. But we also know from the book of Acts that John told these stories many, many times. Imagine if you had spent time with Jesus and had traveled with him and listened to him. Just think how popular you would become among Christ followers, among other Christians. And this was what happened. Wherever he went, people go, John, tell us some stories about when you were with Jesus. I remember my dad, when we were kids, he would climb up on the bunk beds with me and my brother, and he would tell us war stories, army stories, and it was really fun, those, because he was there, and stuff that we had just heard about or seen in movies, he was there, and it was really kind of cool. But imagine, here's someone who spent time with the Son of God, the one you've given your life to, and you wanted to hear. And so John told these over and over and over again. But John was the gospel writer who expressed God in a single word. He wanted it to be very clear and, in a sense, very simple for us. And so he said it this way. He said, God is love. He said that he wrote a couple of letters appropriately called 1st and 2nd John. Very clever titles, I know. But in 1 John, a couple of times he says, God is love. He also refers to him in his gospel as the disciple who Jesus loved. Now, I've heard people say, wow, that's really arrogant for him to say. That was not John's emphasis. John's emphasis wasn't like, I'm the favorite. Jesus loved this guy, but he liked the others, but really, that was not the nature. If you read it in Greek, that wouldn't even be a thought. What it is that John felt so overwhelmingly loved by Jesus that was the emphasis. It wasn't the recipient that was he wanted to give credit to. It was just the fact that every time he turned around, he just felt loved by Jesus. And so, Peter could have said that. All of the disciples could have said this, but John just said, he just loved me so much. I don't even get it how much he loved me. So he wasn't bragging. He was saying, hey, though through his words, through his actions, through our moments together, and even though I didn't even understand sometimes what he was saying, I felt so loved by him that I can't help but point out when I describe myself that he loved me that much. This was an emphasis of the giver of that love. And what makes this so extraordinary is when we see that John, all that he experienced in his life, he went through so many times, so many things. As I mentioned, he's an older guy. He's an older man, and he suffered incredible loss. He's lost his friends. He's lost his family members, and in many ways, he's lost his whole society and culture that was around him. John was alive in 66 A.D. when the Jewish rebellion against Rome, it was known as the First Jewish Revolt. When that all went down, and Nero sent Vespasian to Galilee to crush this rebellion, John's alive during all of this. Vespasian worked his way through Galilee, destroying Jewish cities. He would come in, just completely destroy them, go into those towns, just decimate them. They would slaughter thousands and thousands of people, send thousands of women and children into slavery, into the slave market in Rome. And John's alive, and he's during all of this happening. John lived to see that. Nero dies, and then Vespasian becomes the emperor. And John lived to see Vespasian send his son Titus and the army to surround the holy city of Jerusalem. And basically what they did was they just surrounded him and wouldn't let anybody in and wouldn't let anybody out. And he weakened them, and people would be in there starving, and they couldn't get food or whatever. And finally, when they got to a weakened state with the Jews, in this, they broke in, completely destroyed the city, slaughtered thousands. The thousands that were spared were either sold into slavery or they were sent basically to arenas throughout the empire to be butchered for amusement. John was alive when all that happened. Over 1 million Jews were slaughtered. Over 100,000, some say even 200 or 300,000 Jews were taken from Jerusalem as slaves and flooded the Roman trade market. And so by the time John wrote all this, imagine now. Okay, now we talk about John. That's John. What he has seen. By this time, his friend Peter, already executed. Paul, both of them executed by Nero. And throughout all of this bloodshed, all of that loss, all of that chaos, we look at John, and John never loses faith. In fact, at the very end of the Gospel of John, he writes this in John chapter 20, verse 30. He says this. He said, Jesus performed many other signs, because John had filled his gospel with the signs that Jesus performed, 7 in particular. But other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. In other words, I've given you just a taste of what I've experienced and what I saw with Jesus. Then he says, verse 31, but these are written, the reason why I'm writing down the ones and including the ones I am, is because I'm hoping after you read this account of Jesus' life that you won't just simply be impressed and amazed. This isn't a record of history. He goes, I'm hoping and praying that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life. Not physical life, because everybody reading it already had physical life, but that they might have a different kind of life, that they might have life in his name. And in spite of what John had seen and experienced at the end of his life, with all of that destruction, all that bloodshed, all that gore, everybody and everything important to him gone, just about the loss of all that, Jesus still believed that John still believed that Jesus was the source of some kind of life, some kind of eternal life that he didn't even know, that went way beyond physical. So when John begins his gospel, he doesn't begin with the birth narrative. Now, here's why this is fascinating to me. When Jesus was crucified, as he is dying, and I want to read the scripture of it to kind of, so you can capture this. In John chapter 19, verse 26, it says, when Jesus saw his mother there, so Jesus is hanging on the cross, and he sees his mother there. Can you imagine, moms? And the disciple whom he loved standing there nearby, so here John's standing right next to him, he said to her, woman, here is your son. And to the disciple, here is your mother. And from that time on, this disciple took her into his home. Now, we don't know how much time went by, how much time Mary and John spent together, but here's what we do know. We do know that John took care of Mary until she died. Now, think about it. If you lived with Mary, if you could have a cup of coffee with Mary, but if you lived with Mary and took care of her, all of this, wouldn't you be going, Mary, tell us the story. Tell me the story. How that angel appeared to you? And you and Joseph were promised to each other, but you had, never been with a man. And all of a sudden, an angel says, you are going to bear the Son of God. Tell us that over and over again. And we know that John must have heard her tell these stories over and over, and how amazing. I don't think John ever got tired of hearing Mary tell that story. And we know that John must have heard her, over and over. But, I mean, if anybody had the opportunity to say, hey, Mary, tell me again what it was like. What did you feel when the angel appeared? I mean, what was it like to know that you were pregnant with God's Son? What was that like? What was it like to know that you were going to literally give birth to the Son of God, a baby? I mean, John had heard these stories so many times, yet when he begins his gospel, he doesn't begin with shepherds. She certainly told him about all that. Doesn't begin with a manger, or even with Egypt, or with Herod and the slaughter of all of those baby boys in Bethlehem. He begins with the significance of the birth of Jesus. Just like they were extremely, extremely dark days when John wrote his gospel, John was reminded that Jesus was born at a time that was tremendously dark as well. I'm going to share a message in this series about this further, but now here we are in a season, okay, that's supposed to be wonderful, it's supposed to be bright, yet for many of us, it's a time not just complicated. Some of you are going through deep, deep darkness. And some of you are going through that deep, deep darkness alone. Why? Because it's what we do, right? Whether we come to church or go to work, whatever, you just kind of like, okay, got to get it together. I got to act like everything's fine. Everything's zippity-doo-dah wonderful. And there we go. We live our lives. And really, we're living in this intensely silent darkness inside that we just can't let anybody know. So no matter how dark it is, I want this series to be messages of hope. Now, some of you say, well, my life isn't going through darkness. But there's darkness that we face in our world all around us. But Jesus was born at a time that was extremely and just tremendously dark. It's a time when, and maybe for all of us, it's a time when we can be reminded that of who came, and maybe even as you're thinking of family members and people who are going to come and see you and people who aren't going to be able to come. It's a time when we're reminded of what we're going to get as well as what we'll never get. When John sat down and began to write his gospel, before he got into the narrative of the details, here's what he said. John chapter 1, verse 4. He said, in him was life. And again, not physical life. John has been with Jesus and had significant experience and perspective. He saw people interact with Jesus. He saw the miracles happen. And then John has seen people suffer, and he's watched people die. He's seen that destruction, and he's seen that persecution that I was just talking to you about. So he says, when I think about Jesus, the best way I can express it is this: in him was life. And that life, he goes on to say, was the light of all mankind. Now, this was a huge statement. We've read this, and some of you have it memorized. But it was so much bigger than we realized, because when Jesus showed up, see, people immediately began to look at him as a Jewish Messiah. The Jewish Messiah has shown up. They thought that Jesus came to, that really what he would do would be regional. They thought that what Jesus would do would be for Israel, and would just be a continuation of the Old Testament. John sits back as an old man, and he says, I realize now that Jesus didn't simply come for us. And when he said us, Jews. Jesus didn't simply come for the Jewish people. What Jesus came for was all mankind. And we take that for granted, but then they certainly didn't. He brought a kind of life, and he brought a light that was for all mankind. John was there the day that Jesus rose from the dead. He talked with Jesus after he had risen from the dead. He was there when Acts 1, when it says, then they gathered around him and asked him, Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom of Israel? See, they're thinking all of this, even after his resurrection, thinking this is all going to be localized. This is all going to make the Jews happy. Jerusalem's going to be different. Rome's going to be gone. Are we about to run the Romans right out of here and reestablish our independence? That's what they're thinking. It's now the time. And John was also there when Jesus said, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, that's none of your business. He said to them, it is not for you to know the times or dates the Father has set by his own authority. Jesus said, guys, listen up. And he's saying to us too, by the way, here's my plan. Here is my plan for you. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you. And I'm going to tell you exactly why you're here. You guys want to know why you're here? Here's exactly why you're here. And you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. You said you are going to go into every nation and share with every ethnic group, every people group. You're going to share them what you have heard me say. The stuff that I've been pouring into you the last 3 years, you're going to give that away. You're going to make disciples of all nations. The light isn't a Jewish light. The light is for all mankind. And this is my favorite part of John as he starts out his introduction. In verse 5, it says, the light shines in the darkness. Now think of that just in our world setting. John was thinking about all the darkness around him. I mean, I just told you some pretty horrific stuff that was going on. 1 million Jews killed. Hundreds of thousands of people into slavery, into the arenas, all of that. He's watched all of this go down. When Titus was surrounding Jerusalem, John may have been inside Jerusalem. He certainly, heard about it. It was close by. He may have. Some historians think that he was actually inside watching all of this go down. The light shines in the darkness. And he says, in spite of everything that's happened, everyone who has died, everyone who has been executed, everyone who was taken away and tortured and sold into slavery, in spite of the fact that basically the entire Jewish nation as we know it is out of commission at this point. And even though everything I have, everything I know, and everything I love is gone, this light shines in the darkness. And the darkness has not, and I picture John, I'm just kind of thinking of, him trying to, okay, what's the right word? And the darkness, how do I say this? I mean, everyone knows what it means for a light to shine in darkness and expose, what the darkness is and to, brighten it. But the light of Christ shining in darkness, as if the darkness has tried to surround and capture the light and to overwhelm it and snuff out the light. As hard as it seems our world and our culture has tried to blow out this light, John says, and the darkness has not overcome it. I mean, everyone knows that light in the darkness removes the darkness. And he's saying the light that Christ brought. You see all this darkness around you? You feel you're experiencing darkness in your life right now? Let me tell you something. That darkness that you're feeling in your life and you're experiencing in your situation, whether it be in your finances, in your marriage, even spiritually, emotionally, let me tell you, that darkness does not have to overcome when you let the light of life into your light. I mean, this is the guy who got news that Paul had been executed. This is the guy that heard about Peter being executed. And he perhaps heard about others as well, since historic tradition tells us that all of the followers of Christ. John actually died of natural causes, but history says that they tried boiling him to death, but that he survived. And then he was exiled to Patmos, where he wrote Revelation. That's a different message. But it appears that John was that last disciple alive, but he's got a joy in his heart. He's got a smile on his face because he's got a joy and a peace in his heart in spite of all that's happened to him right in his world around him. The darkness has tried to capture and smash the light. And yet he says that light is life. John just emphatically declares that the darkness has not and could not and cannot overcome it. The light overwhelmed the darkness. There was no way to destroy that light. Caesar couldn't do it. He tried. Tiberius couldn't do it. Nero couldn't do it. You just go down through history of people trying to do it. It just didn't work. The destruction of the temple didn't do it. The death, the crucifixion of the Son of God didn't do it. Because he, even though they thought the light of life was finally eliminated, 3 days later, the light of the world shone brighter than ever before, rose from the dead. Don't forget this. Remember, John was the one who raced to the tomb, and he was so anxious to get there, he beat Peter, but he didn't go in because nobody goes running into a empty tomb except Peter, But he gets there, and finally he peeks and peers in, and it's empty tomb. This was the same John who had breakfast with Jesus on the beach after he had risen from the dead. This was the same John who was absolutely convinced that no matter what we face, no matter what happens in our life, no matter how deep the heartache, no matter what extreme fear, no matter how deep the depression, there is a light that shines in darkness, and there is no amount of darkness or any type of darkness that can put that out. So, all year, but especially at Christmas, when we're confronted with the fact that perhaps like never before, there are problems we can't solve. You have, people you can't control. There are expectations around you that you just can't meet, no matter what. One of the things that I want you to take away, and this is just, the point, and I hope that you've already gathered that, is this: Jesus is life and light who overcomes the dark. There is always hope. There is always a reason to believe. There is a God who hears our prayers. There is a reason to wake up every single morning to take that next step. See, what makes this the most wonderful time of the year? Not necessarily what's happening. But what does make this the most wonderful time of the year is what happened. What happened? Reading this again, John chapter 1, verse 4. In him was life, and the life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John go through some dark times? Yeah, absolutely. Do you and I go through some dark times? Yes. After sharing that with you, probably say, well, I've had some dark times, but not like that, the darkness is the darkness, right? Whatever that darkness is, that darkness might be an addiction. That darkness might be it's something you're trapped into, and you think, I can't get out of it. This is too dark. Jesus came to bring a light that no darkness can overcome. It's an overwhelming light that can remove all darkness. It could be relational darkness. It could be spiritual darkness. You could be really, really struggling. That light shines in the darkness. Now, if if you've got your own little artificial light thing going. Jesus made it very clear. He didn't come to call the righteous. He came to call sinners. So if you've got it together and you feel like, I'm feeling it, you're probably not as bright as you think you are. But thank you for... But the fact is, if you are living and struggling in darkness, Jesus is that light. In John 16, I'll close with this. He says, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble. You will have problems you can't solve. You will have persecution. There will be destruction. There will be darkness. But take heart. I have overcome the world. So as we go through this season, I hope that it'll be characteristic of having that light in our life. I hope that you'll be driving by, and if you're ever in awe over somebody's house who's got a display, that it'll remind you, that's a cool light, and that's a lot of fun. But there is a light that overcomes all darkness. Let's pray. No matter what you're going through, Jesus is the light of the world. He came to shine. And I don't know the problems you're going through. Many of us go through private darknesses. We go through personal, private midnights that just seem like we're never going to get through it. John went through some really, really dark times. I think he, after watching everything that went down, was grateful that he was even alive to be able to write his gospel, and alive to be able to write 1st and 2nd John, and alive to write Revelation. I'm sure he was grateful that he survived it, because he very well could have been one of the other Christians who was taken and destroyed, executed like Peter and John and Paul. But John knew that God had put him here to spread that light. Today you may have come and you say, wow, how did you know? I didn't know, but God knew. God knew you were going to be here today. God knows the darkness you're going through in your life. It might be at work. It might be at home. You may have gotten some very bad news. You may have gotten a shock. Jesus is the light who can shine in your darkness. If you've never opened your heart up to him, you can do that today. You've heard it a number of times. We've sung it. We've declared it here that Jesus Christ, God's Son, came. And he came not so that we would celebrate Christmas. He came to die, to be buried, and to rise again. He did that to pay for our sin, because we could never pay for it ourselves. He came so that we could have that joy, that peace, that forgiveness, that hope of eternal life. God never wanted us to go through this life with our fingers crossed, hoping everything would be fine. He came as a light to remove that darkness. Will times be tough? Absolutely. Can they even sometimes be horrific? Yes. But if you have the light of the world in your life as the very center and the focus of your life, it overcomes all of that darkness. If you've never given your life to Christ, you can do that today. In fact, I'll just lead you in a prayer, and there's no magical prayer. It's really you're making a decision of faith. You're trusting God today, asking Christ to be your Savior, to be your Lord, and you just can pray that to him right now. It's a good way to confirm that step. Just right now this morning, just say, Dear God, just right in your heart, just say, Dear God, thank you for sending Jesus, your Son, to die for me, to be buried, and to rise again. I accept you today. I accept your forgiveness, your payment for my sin. I want to be in your family. I want your light to overcome my darkness. Come into my life. Be my Savior. You know, when you invite Christ in, he says, anyone who calls on me will be saved. Anyone who invites me, and I will in no wise cast out. Jesus welcomes you. He welcomes you to the light. Father, thank you for this opportunity for us to just take some time in the busyness and the craziness that's probably going to get even crazier the next couple of weeks, but just to reflect on how wonderful you are. And I pray, Father, that you would use this time for us to be a really time to focus on you and a real time of worship. It's sadly, Lord, we sometimes go through and we get in the middle of it and we can hardly wait for it to be over just because of the franticness and the difficulty and the complications that happen. But help us to keep our eyes on you and to let what may seem like overwhelming darkness to be completely illuminated by your love and by your presence. Thank you for this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Hey, as we close, I want to just say, I hope that you'll plan to be here for our whole series. It'll be a time of encouragement and will be a time when I know that you'll be blessed as we, really focus on what we should be focusing on. And I know it's going to be busy, but it can be busy with joy or it could be busy with, dread. And we're going to add some light and we're going to focus on really the reason for all of this. And so it's great. If there is any way I can be of help to you, pray for you. If you're a guest, I'd love to know about you being a guest here. And just fill out this welcome slip and drop in the offering plate. Just so you know, we don't give these away. We're not going to put you on a junk mail list. If you'd like to be a part of our weekly email that I send out, I just give you some information. Please feel free to let us know that, and if you get the email for a while and don't want to, it's a very super easy subscribe. So feel free, and we want to be of help to you and pray for you and give you any information that you'd like. Hey guys, why don't you come and we'll accept the offering to the Lord. There's a lot of emphasis on shopping and giving and so forth, but us giving to the Lord is just such a wonderful, natural part of our expression of love to Him, and I'm so glad that we can do that. So, hey, Roger, would you pray and thank God we could give at this time? Thanks.
The world waits for a miracle. The heart longs for a little bit of hope. Oh come, Emmanuel. The child prays for peace on earth, and she's calling out from a sea of hurt. Oh come, Emmanuel. And can you hear the angels singing? Glory to the light of the world. Glory, the light of the world is here. The drought breaks with the tears of a mother. A baby's cry is the sound of love. Come down, Emmanuel. Here's the song for the suffering. He is Messiah, the Prince of Peace has come. He has come, Emmanuel. Lord,
I've been listening to that all week, actually the last 2 weeks. And I thought, man, I wish I could preach a message for 4 minutes that would make the impact that I know that song is going to make, or is made on me. But, glory, God with us, light of the world. And so I just had to share that with you. And I don't know if you've heard that. That was brand new to me, but great song, Light of the World. So, hey, before you go, I want to highlight a couple things. First of all, ladies, speaking of holiday festive fun, those of you who signed up for the cookie exchange, everything's set up, ready to go, and that's down in the fellowship hall, so I hope that you enjoy that. Also, there's some needs, some ministry needs that would really be of great help to us. Many of you know Liza Sonner. She has been doing the bulletin, I don't know, more than 10 years. I don't know how many years she's been doing the bulletin, but she works on the weekends and works Sunday, and she finally said, you know what, Pastor David, I'm ready to, the way she put it is, pass the crown onto another bulletin king or queen that would like to be able. So if you like to do some kind of behind the scenes things like that, and we would show you how to do it. It's not terribly complicated, but it's we wouldn't just leave you high and dry. In fact, Liza even said she would meet with whoever would be willing to do that, or maybe more than one person. So let me know if you're willing to help with that. It would be great. Also, once a month with setting up communion. That's something else that we need, just something that's just, like I said, once a month thing, and that's a very easy task. As the church grows, as people come, especially during the Christmas season, people are coming, they're going to bring their kids. We have that covered, but we really need some nursery workers to be able to help with the little tykes, the really tiny ones. So if you are a baby person and you would like to help with that, please see me, and that would be a great deal of help. And I appreciate that so very much. Okay. Also, guys, remember this coming Saturday, so yesterday was not our men's breakfast. This coming Saturday is our men's breakfast here at Hillside. And so next Sunday after church, I would like to gather together. In fact, we've got lunch, very quick lunch, pizza lunch, for all of those who helped us by taking the survey and a really analysis survey with regard to asking different questions about ministry, things that we really need help with. And if you took that survey, we would love for you to come. We're going to share with you what the findings were, where we're strong, where we're weak, where are areas that need some tweaking, and some that maybe need to be overhauled, and ones that we really are doing great in and need to strengthen maybe a little bit. But we want to share that information with you. Now, some of you are sitting here going, man, I didn't get to take that survey, but I would love to have that information. If you are a part of Hillside, I don't mean you're just curious, if somebody drug you here and they had to bribe you with lunch, those of you who would say, Hillside's my family. This is my church. I want to do what I can to be of help. This is for you. So we want you to be here next week. Again, it's a very quick lunch and information that we'll be sharing, and then and we want to let you know what we're going to be, some steps that we're going to already have started, and stuff we're going to be doing in order to address those issues. So next Sunday, you don't have to RSVP anything. We're going to take an RSVP that Sunday morning before we order the pizza, because we're going to have it delivered here, obviously, and so we just will get a show of hands. So if you're interested and willing to help, just come next week, and we'll be so grateful for that. All right. That was a lot of stuff hit at once. Hope you got that in your phones or wherever you keep all of your important info. And I will really look forward to seeing you next week. All right. God bless. Have a great rest of the week.